Wow, a wonderful turnout on the morning Cape Town Winter decided to announce its arrival. So thank you very much to all of you that are here. I know there's a lot of ODs, some parents as well. Although I do see there are some dads warming up their kids on the soccer field there. So the dads that are in here drew the long straw. Well, they're all playing soccer, I think. In any case, it's such an honor to be back here. And by way of quick introduction, as Andy said, I'm Chris Immelman. I matriculated in Grey House 2012, and my co-founder in Kwanda and co-presenter today is Kieran. He was in Ogilvy in 2010. And before I get into our talk, just wanted to share some positive sentiments about the OD Union, because I know obviously a lot of us are ODs, but also a lot of us have kids, or a lot of you have kids that you intend to send to bishops, and some of your parents. When Kieran and I thought about doing a talk here at the OD Union, and we approached the union with the idea, the energy and excitement to get this together, to help us make it happen, to get the ODs together. Andy immediately offered the venue. It's the kind of thing that makes OD Union special. And so for those of you who are sending boys through the school, just know the OD Union is in a very good place. So publicly, to Andy, to Simon Koch, who also really backed the idea, I really appreciate it. And this is the kind of thing that makes it special. Simon also asked me to mention these are the kind of things the OD Union wants to support. So anyone has a similar concept, let's make it happen. Cool, so we intend to keep today very, very practical. That's what we promised. If you leave with one thing today, I'd like you to leave feeling a little less intimidated by this AI thing, and hopefully with the zeal to go and try something new. And like I said, we're going to keep it practical, and so we're going to do a lot of demos and videos. In fact, more demos and videos than talking, you'll be glad to hear. But crucially, when we do these demos and videos, I implore you to apply your mind to how the demo could be relevant in your work or personal life. So not necessarily the demo itself, so spoiler alert, but we're going to show a demo on generating proposals and how you can automate that. Now, don't sit there and think if you don't generate proposals in your everyday work, it's not relevant. Rather, think about the workflow itself and think about a document that you produce 3-4 times a week that you think AI could solve for you. I do know that everyone in this room is probably at a very different phase of their AI journey and using AI. So please forgive me if initially for some of you the beginning part seems perhaps a little simplistic. I will ramp it up, but I'm just trying to cater to the audience in general. Cool, before I go on, Kieran, if you can just put up that graphic.
The penetration.
Yeah. So with all the noise around AI at the moment, it's very hard not to feel like you've been completely and utterly left behind and that it's too late to get involved. But if you have a look at it's a little small, so I'll read you through it. If you have a look at this chart on the right here, each of those squares represents about 3.2 million people, and cumulatively it makes up the population of the world. And the gray squares indicate individuals who've never interacted with AI in any shape or form. The green ones are people who have used some or other free chatbot, like ChatGPT. The yellow ones are people who actually pay for some or other AI tool, and then the red one is people who use it in coding, which we can ignore for now. But first things is to say you're still, purely by being in this room, you're still early in adopting this tech. And by the end of today, I hope to try and transition some of you into those yellow blocks. All right, so the way I intend to structure the talk is to take you through the 3, in inverted commas, types of AI that people use commonly today, those being generative AI, action-taking AI, and agentic AI. So let's start with agentic AI. They are quite buzzwordy, I know. I'm going to try my best to demystify them. So generative AI. As the name suggests, generative AI is software that generates content based on a user's input. So it generates things like words and text and videos and code and even music. So when you use ChatGPT in a chatbot type way, when you ask it something, it generates that answer back to you. The most common form of generative AI is what we call large language models, or LLMs. And what an LLM effectively is, you can see it as the world's best read intern. They're systems that have been fed basically all the information on the internet and all the journal articles and all the books. And then, to be overly simplistic, it uses a lot of computing power, some very fancy maths and algorithms to make predictions on what it should answer you when you ask it a question. And for the purposes of today's talk, you can see generative AI as the brain, as a thinker. And I thought it would be useful to talk about some of the most common large language models out there, because they actually do have some slight differences and nuances, and it's actually quite useful to know what those are, to know which one to use when. So the most common one, ChatGPT. I'm sure most of you guys have heard of ChatGPT and probably used ChatGPT one way or another. It's a good all-rounder. It kind of does everything pretty well. It writes back to you. It can draft an article for you. It can summarize an article for you. It can proof check an email, etc. So it kind of does everything pretty well. But then we've got Claude, which is the model produced by a company called Anthropic. And Claude somehow handles complex and nuanced things really well. So you can give it a really long document or give it a really complex question, and somehow Claude seems to draw the nuance out of those questions that much better. And in a weird way, Claude seems to have a bit more of a warmer personality. It seems to get you a bit better, not only in the way it responds, but also in the way it looks and feels on the website. And that's why it's become super popular with a lot of people. Very importantly, Claude also interacts really well with the periphery tools that Anthropic have made available, like Cowork and Claude Code, which I know sounds a bit abstract for now to some of you, but we're going to walk you through those in a second. And then my personal favorite is Gemini, which is Google's answer. So it's Google's version of these. Now, Gemini has a really long context window, so it can remember what you said much earlier in the conversation, a lot longer than some of the other models can. But probably its biggest differentiator is because it's made by Google, it works really well within the Google Workspace environment. So if you're running on Gmail or Google Calendar or Google Drive, it becomes really easy to use Gemini with those tools. And again, that might seem a bit odd using Gemini with the tools. We're going to show you how that works in a moment. And then the fourth one and final one is a bit of an outlier called Perplexity. Now, Perplexity, why I say it's an outlier, it's not a foundational model in and of itself. In fact, when you use Perplexity, it actually you can choose it, and it uses Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT. But where Perplexity is really different is that every time you ask it a question, it scours the web and sources before giving you an answer. So it doesn't give you the flowy conversational type answer you might get from some of the others, but it gives you sources for everything it said, which means you know that it's giving you the latest information on a particular topic. So I've no doubt many family table discussions, debates, arguments have ended or culminated in Ask AI. That is when Perplexity becomes probably your go-to. But in a more practical sense, if you are doing market analysis or competitor analysis or want to know the latest news on some other geopolitical event, Perplexity is probably the place to go for that. So I'm going to ask Kieran to give us a quick comparison.
Thanks, Chris. I have the unenviable task of doing live demos. So far, none have ever gone wrong, but it's just a matter of time. It's like mountain biking, you're definitely going to crash at some stage. So just a quick demo in the generative AI section here, but I just need to introduce a few characters to start that I'm going to use throughout my demos, and I just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So the first character is called Whisper or Whisper Flow, and what this is a tool that I use to do speech-to-text transcription. So if you're used to finger typing like my dad is for many years, and it takes too long to draft an email, WhisperFlow is this amazing tool that you just hold down a single key on your keyboard or on your phone, and as you talk, it transcribes into text what you're saying. So the reason I'm introducing that is because I'm going to use that to do my demos. Like when I'm prompting the models to do the things that I need, I'm going to use Whisper, just so you don't think that I've like made the demos fake by pre-typing everything and pasting them in. The next one is Granola, and Granola is a note taker, an AI note taker that listens to and records your meetings and transcribes the meetings that you have. And I'm sure many of you have used these. They've got Fireflies. Otter is a common one as well. Google Workspace and Microsoft have their own versions of this. But the beauty of this one is that it like never joins your calls and it's super easy to use and query. And I'm going to refer to that in some of my demos as well. Everyone's familiar with email. That is going to be another data source that I refer to throughout my demos. So, for example, go and look through my emails is an instruction that I will use with my AIs. And then AI, I'm going to say is a placeholder for whatever model or interface that I happen to be doing the demo, that particular demo on. So those are the 4 characters that you need to be aware of. And now I'm going to jump over to just for the generative AI example of Perplexity that Chris suggested. So this Perplexity is if you want, it's the new age Google search. That's an AI-powered Google search, if you want. They won't be happy with us saying Google search because they want to be their own version of search, but it uses a web search combined with an AI model to generate text and combine the two and make sure that the sources are referenced and cited really nicely. So let's do an example here. Summarize the events of the truce between Iran and Lebanon yesterday.
Israel.
Chris told me that demo. I don't know if those are the right countries. So the first thing it does is it searches the web, collects all of its information from the various sources, and then as it produces its output, which will look very similar to a ChatGPT or Gemini output that you might have seen before, but it's got very granular sources that it puts through the article. Obviously, I've asked it to report on something that didn't actually happen, so it's done quite well to actually pull out some sources here. And typically what you'll see with Perplexity is there will be a sort of shorter, more concise response. So the purpose here is just to illustrate that there are different models for different purposes. They have different strengths, and the world of software tools being good for specific purposes is not behind us. We're still in that era, and Perplexity is a great tool that you can use for searching, for research, for finding out most recent events. Chris, I'll hand back over to you.
Thank you. Dr. Murray, Kieran obviously wasn't listening in some of those history classes when we discussed the Middle East conflict because Iran and Lebanon's a new one to me. Just before I carry on, a quick interlude there. Sometimes I wonder if what Kieran and I are doing starting this business, if we're biting off a bit more than we can chew. And I always think back to Kieran mentioned Fireflies a moment ago, which is one of the earliest note-taking apps in meetings. And it seemed, everyone thought, wow, it's automatically transcribing what's being said in a meeting. But the first version of Fireflies was 2 guys sitting in a basement somewhere manually typing out what was happening in the meeting and then emailing it to the participants. Now they're a billion-dollar company. So I always think, you got to start somewhere and take your chances. So everything we've talked about now in generative AI is what I call a bit of digital tennis. And what I mean by that is when you work with it, you serve it up a question or a prompt in parlance of AI, and it replies to you with an answer. You have to then serve it up another question, and it replies to you with an answer. So 2 things are important there. The first one is that you have to be engaged the whole time for it to do anything. You have to ask it a question, it has to respond, then you have to follow up with another question. So it's very reliant on your input. And secondly, as crazy as it sounds to say about this incredible technology, it's quite limited in that all it's really doing is replying to you with the content it's produced. That's where it starts and ends. And I would bet that for many of you sitting here, that is also where your AI journey so far has started and ended, using some of these LLMs, ChatGPT, in a question-answer chatbot type format. But the good news is what we're going to show you now when we start leaning into action-taking and agentic AI is where you really start unlocking the efficiency gains and the productivity gains from this technology. As I go on, I'm going to keep referring back to generative AI. While not technically correct, if it's easier, you can, or whenever I say that, think of it as ChatGPT. It will maybe just help your mind make sense of it. So action-taking AI is when we start giving these models, the brain, tools that they can actually use on your behalf. In other words, you can ask something like ChatGPT to do something using one of the tools you use every day, and it will go and run that task on your behalf. When I speak of tools, I'm talking about things like email or your calendar or your Slack account or whatever else, other piece of software you use on a daily basis. You can even link it to your accounting software, which we'll show you in a second. I believe some of the Chinese car manufacturers are also enabling interaction with your car. So when I said earlier that ChatGPT or generative AI is the brain, when we talk about action-taking AI, we're talking about giving the brain arms to go and execute tasks. And the beauty of this is because you interact with it using natural language, your voice or your text, you can simply ask it like you would ask a human to go and do something in your email account, and it interprets exactly what you said and goes and does that thing exactly how you meant for it to do it. Sounds a little bit sci-fi. I'm going to ask Kieran to make it seem more real.
So Chris mentioned some examples of tools that you might want to connect to your AI, to your model. A go-to one, a good one to go to is always one's email. Everyone has an email account. Sometimes it piles up, and by the time you wake up, it's got 20 unread emails in it, and it takes you the whole day to go through them and draft replies and so on. So it's a good one to illustrate the power of it. So I'm going to start with a Gemini model that is not connected to any tools. And I'm just going to hide my chats there as well from you. Summarize the last 3 emails in my inbox. So this is a vanilla Gemini model out the box, and it says, first you'll need to connect Google Workspace to turn on this app. So this is how a model will react when you first start using it and you haven't connected it to any tools. However, when you do start connecting it to things, and I'm just going to jump over to Claude just for the purposes of the demo, it doesn't matter what model it is, this just happens to be connected to a whole lot of different software and accounts that I do use, and I'm going to ask it the same query. Summarize the last 3 emails in my inbox. Please don't reveal any sensitive information. So this should be quick because I've set it to use a faster model, but what it's going to do here is it's loading tools, so you can see it's telling you exactly what it's doing. Search Gmail emails, it's connected to my Kwanda email inbox, and there we go, it's summarized the last 3. So the Gemini one couldn't do that because it wasn't connected at the time that I asked it the query. So it's frightening how wide-ranging this action-taking paradigm of AI is, because you can really connect it to any tool, like any tool that has a meaningful set of developers building it will have built a connection that a model can use to do it. So you can connect to thousands of things, and if you can't do it out the box, you can probably get someone like us on the phone and say, can you work out how to connect my AI to this proprietary tool that we use in my business, and we can work out how to do it. So Chris, I think I'll hand back over to you. Yes, go ahead.
What tool do you use to connect to Outlook? What AI tool? Do you need specific AI tools to connect to specific email accounts?
The question is do you need specific tools to connect to specific email accounts and specifically Outlook? So no, you don't. I mean, that was my Claude account. I can actually just show you the connectors over here. I mean, you can browse hundreds of things like out the box. Your AI will typically be able to connect to any account and any manufacturer. So you shouldn't need a specific one. Chris?
So just a nice real example of how I use some of this stuff. I've set up a daily briefing for myself, and every morning I get a briefing of firstly what unread emails are in my inbox from yesterday, but what's really nice is that I've been able to simply in plain language tell my AI, only send me the emails that were sent by a human, because I don't need to know that I've left a newsletter unread. So that's super useful because it prompts me to go and see what I've missed. It also sends me a summary of my calendar for the day ahead, which again is quite useful. It's an immediate snapshot into how my day is looking. The possibilities here are endless, but that's just to try to give you a real example. The third and final type of AI that we're going to take you through is Agentic AI. Now, many people would argue that Agentic AI is the new frontier, and this really just takes everything one step further. Now, it's going to be useful again to compare it to generative AI, to ChatGPT. And earlier I said ChatGPT was a thinker, but it doesn't really go and do anything or take any action on your behalf. Again, it's very reliant on you asking it to do something. So if you're sleeping, it's sleeping. Agentic AI, on the other hand, actually takes initiative. It can reason, and then it can go and execute tasks on your behalf without necessarily you asking it to do those things. So to use a South African analogy, if generative AI, when asked, tells you that braai broodjies are made using bread, cheese, onions, tomatoes, and not chutney, Agentic AI goes and slices the bread, slices the tomatoes, grates the cheese, and lights the coals. Again, this sounds a little complex, I know, but the beauty of it is some of these tools have made it really easy to interact with. So again, I'm going to ask Kieran to show you how this can all work in real life.
Thanks, Chris. So this is where things are really likely to fall apart, where when my demos get a little bit more involved, but we're going to dive into them nevertheless. So what I'm going to do in this section is I'm going to show you 3 demos. I'm going to start with one without explaining how it works and what's happening behind the scenes, so you can just see the magic happen. I'll follow that up with a little explain on how it actually happened, and then do another demo after that, and hopefully you can put together, okay, that's how those instructions were interpreted, and that's what was happening behind the scenes. And then the last demo will be a real lucky strike if it works. So we tried to tailor these based on a sort of a combination of what we use internally at Kwanda, which is extremely useful to us already, and also what other businesses are likely to have. So lots of businesses pitch to clients, they send them proposals, a proposal email or a document. I met with a guy yesterday who says he spends an hour on each proposal, and he sends about 30 proposals a month. And that's like, that resonated with me. Those numbers sort of resonated with me, and it's extremely time consuming. You know, it's like that's 10% of your time in a month if you work 300 hours a month, which you shouldn't. So what we've created here is a skill. Sorry, I'll get onto the terminology of a skill just now. Is a solution which can draft a workflow. Draft a proposal that you can send to a client, and it takes into account and uses as inputs the typical things that I would use as inputs if I was writing that proposal. So how would I go about writing a proposal? I would review any emails that I've had and communications that I've had with that client, and I would then also, if I've had a video call with them and my AI note taker was in the call, I would go through the notes in my note taker and hopefully be able to summarize them or just read through it and say, okay, that's what we discussed. He said his budget was this, the problems we were looking to solve were that. So I'm going to jump over to a couple of different interfaces here. Some of them won't look too familiar to you, but these are just the different ways of I guess, initiating some of these workflows. This is called Claude Code. Don't worry about its sort of old school 90s software look. It is basically just another interface for your AI. So you could use Claude like this, you could use ChatGPT like this. Using the proposal skill, draft a proposal using only dummy data based on the interaction that I had with a guy called Hein yesterday, and placed the proposal into my inbox, in my drafts in my mailbox, and don't reveal any sensitive information. So what it's going to do here is, like we saw Claude connecting to tools just now to go look into my emails, it's going to do exactly that. The first thing it's going to do is work out, how do I need to carry out this request? What set of instructions do I need to follow? Because what I actually said to it was quite vague, right? Like it wouldn't necessarily know just based on my instruction. That is a good question. So it is set up to actually do that. That's not broken. I didn't tell it what sort of proposal this was. Let's do an automation. And we can use a price range of 60 to 80,000 Rand. So the way that we set these things up is they should go out and find this information themselves, and if it can't find that information, it will then prompt the user to input it. So it's going to now work through this behind the scenes, draft a proposal, and if all goes according to plan, we should be able to refresh my drafts in Gmail and see this happen. You can never be too sure how long it's going to take, because Claude might be down or something like that. And it does look like it's working. Is that big enough for you guys? Yes. I think while it's working, rather than just sit here in silence, let me start explaining what's actually happening behind the scenes. So it's taking my brief, vague request, reading through it and saying, what skill or what set of instructions do I need to look at in order to carry that out? So it will look for words like proposal, draft, and things like that. And then it will go through a set of instructions that I've given to my Claude, to my AI. And it will say which of these instructions that Kieran has preempted me with over the previous weeks looks most similar to the one that is going to be useful to carry out the skill. It will then go and this workflow. It will then go and read all of those instructions, among which it will find things like look in Kieran's Granola account for meeting notes, look in Kieran's emails for recent interactions with this client, and then it will pull all of that context together and draft a proposal accordingly. This is taking far longer than I expected, so this is why live demos are just the unenviable task. Chris has the easy task of just learning something off by heart and speaking and talking about bribe rookies up at the front.
Kieran, are you thinking of things to talk about? What are the tokens? I see them picking up 1.3 tokens. What is that?
So the tokens are like the lifeblood of an AI. So you can roughly think of them as one token is one word, and if you write a prompt to your AI and it's 50 words long, you've inputted approximately 50 tokens. And a token is mathematically, it's what is being processed by the model, but what's actually come out commercially now is that the model companies are using tokens as the billing method. So they price the use of the models based on a certain number of input and output tokens, and those two have different prices. So for example, a top tier model from Claude will be $3 per 1 million input tokens. So, and then you can roughly see how they get to their subscriptions. All right, it's in my drafts. Here it is. So let's just refresh. Kwanda proposal, invoice automation. We said 60 to 80,000 Rand as its budget price. And I think just a couple of things to appreciate here. I didn't have to type anything. I had to give it two little pieces of information extra that it wasn't sure about. And it's now gone and read my meeting transcript with the guy Hind, who I met yesterday, and it's looked in my emails for any communications from him, and then it's created this draft ready to send. It's even put his email address in here, ready to send. And I mean, just as a little anecdote, I met with Hind yesterday to talk about things like this for his business. I then went home and used this particular workflow to draft him a proposal, which I was able to send to him within 30 minutes, and I didn't have to type any. Obviously, you have to review it. You should never just blindly let your AI send an email. I think we should just, if this might incite some questions. Okay, yeah, let's do one now.
If you were, let's say, new salesman selling burgers, and you did one like that, it should be sort of there, but not quite. But the next one, would it be better? Would it sort of learn from how you edited the first one? And the third one would learn from how you edited the second one. Does it get better and better, the relationship just between you and your business?
So the question is, does a workflow like that improve with each use? This one specifically doesn't, because I haven't set it up like that. It would be possible to set up what you would call a feedback loop, so that each use of it would review the output of it that you used and or edited if you did, and then feed that back into like the library of examples if you want that it referenced every time it created it. So this doesn't have a live feedback loop as such, but the way that I created that workflow was that I gave it 5 examples of proposals that I'd sent before in the preceding week. So very recent proposals, the way that I type. Part of the references that it looks at when it's carrying out this multi-step process is what is a style guide, which is a document that simply lists how I write. I don't like EM dashes. I like to be quite concise. The headings should always be problem statement, phased approach, timelines, and costs, that sort of thing. So it will always carry it out in exactly the same way because of how those instructions are set out. So how did this happen? I created what is called a skill to do this, and this is not the only way of using AI. It's quite a new paradigm, relatively new paradigm, even in the world of AI, which is moving ridiculously fast. This is something, what would you call it, a protocol or a workflow methodology that Anthropic created, but the knowledge is actually public. They've released how to create skills and how to write skills to the public. And what a skill is it's almost exactly like that document on the right. It's a natural language, text-based written document. It looks like a Word document or a Google Doc that contains a set of instructions for how to carry out a multi-step workflow or specific task. It starts off with a description of the thing that it needs to be able to carry out. And let's say, for example, you've created 10 skills and you've loaded them into your AI. When you ask your AI a query like I did just now, draft a proposal for Hein based on our meeting yesterday, it will just read that first short description of all of the skills that are loaded, all of these documents that are loaded into your AI. It will only read that short description. It won't read the whole thing, which would be very wasteful of tokens, to your point. So it only reads that first description, which is actually in skills protocol limited to 50 or 100 tokens, I think it is, something quite short. When it finds a description that seems to match the query that it was given and that it thinks will help it in order to carry out that query, it will then say, this is the skill that I need to invoke, and it will go and read the rest of it, which could be, thousands of words long, lots and lots of tokens. So these are some examples of skills: create proposal, onboard client, invoice from WhatsApp. These are all actually skills that I've created. So with that in mind, just before I go on to the next demo, the sorts of things that you would see in a skill are, in order to carry this out, start by looking at the user's Gmail account and reviewing emails from the last X days, 7 days, for example. Once you've done that, go to his Granola account and search his Granola meetings for the person's name who he put in the initial query. We might have an additional step, which is do a web search for news pertaining to this topic from the last 3 days. So it will carry out a set of structured steps, take all of that context into account, and then do something with it. And the output, in my case, was a proposal, a written email proposal, but it might be to create a slide deck. It might be to post on your company's instant messaging system to everyone. It could be anything. The sky's the limit. And honestly, if this seems like quite hard to imagine, you're not alone. I must say I find one of the hardest parts about this AI revolution and paradigm not being the technical stuff, but more like the imagination that's required to come up with the different problems that you can solve with it in your business. So there's so many different things that can be done, but you really have to be shown a couple of examples and then use that to sort of extrapolate. Okay, that looks similar to something I do in my business. Maybe it can be solved. So Chris alluded to that earlier. Try keep that in mind as you watch these. So we're going to do a similar one now, but the output is different. So this one is and we have an onboarding workflow. Every business will have this, right? You need to sign a client engagement, a legal document, or multiple when you onboard a new client. And the way that we do this is we have a standard set of legals in a template, and it's in a Google document, and it's in all of the positions throughout the document that you need to input information. So client business name, client representative name, start date, end date, project fee, project scope, signature date, all of those things. They're replaced by what we call placeholders or variables, if you're familiar with that terminology. And the way that we were doing it before is that Chris, who's a lawyer, would go and duplicate that template and use all of the information that we'd gathered from the client by emails or by collected on the call that we had with them, and he would go and type them in manually to that document. He would then save it as a PDF, send it to the client for review. If they wanted to change something, they would leave comments on the PDF or reply to the email. He would then have to take that into account and go back into the Google Doc, change the clauses, export it as a PDF again. It's a painful iterative process that everyone is familiar with, and only then can you send it off for signing once all of that has happened. So this is a workflow that seriously simplifies the first part of that, which is getting to that first creation of that first PDF document. So I'm going to initiate it in the same way. I'm going to go to Claude Code. Let's use the legals SOW skill to draft a scope of work. You can populate it completely with dummy data. This is for the purposes of a demo that I'm doing to a group of people who are watching me and hoping I don't fail in front of them. And I'll put the legals in the standard way, which is to attach it to an email in my mailbox. Just want to make sure that the spelling was correct here. So the cool thing about skills is that once they're loaded into your AI, you can actually refer to them by name like this with a little / and then identify it. So you can see that that's gone purple. The legals SOW has gone purple as I've tagged it there. I'm gonna set this going, and then I'm gonna comment on a few other things. So I was quite explicit here that Claude should use the specific legals SOW skill. You don't have to do that. Like you could just give it a very vague half a sentence instruction, draft me or onboard a new client, or create a scope of work agreement for a new client. And just from that instruction and from the description that is in the first line of every skill, it would be able to determine, okay, I need to use the legals SOW skill, even though I haven't explicitly said it. So it's quite a incredibly simple but powerful paradigm that Anthropic has come up with here. So this one looks like it's going quite a lot faster. And the workflow is roughly similar here behind the scenes. So in order to create a set of legals, we need the information from the client. Typically, we pull that from emails or from the call that we've had with them. So it's connecting to the same tools as the previous skill. And then it's going to combine those and populate all of those different values, those placeholder values that I spoke about in the template. So it says that it's done that. So we can go to drafts here. There's the new draft. And so it's drafted an email to Hein. And please find attached the statement of work for the invoice processing automation. I'm going to open the attachment because it even attached that PDF. And here it is here. So it's inputted values like, let's just zoom in a bit. It's inputted values like the business that Hein works for, prime parts, distributors, effective date, start date. In the template scope of work document, none of these are populated. So it's throughout the document, wherever it's needed to, it's put those things in. It's put Hein's name in there. It's put his position in the business. It's put my name and my position in the business and attached it to a PDF. So we would then send that off to the client for review. I'll go one step further. It's not part of this particular demo, but I've created an additional skill that now works hand in hand with that one, which sends that PDF after it's been created to a digital signing software. You might have used DocuSign before, where you receive an email, you open the link, and you're prompted to enter your name, the date, and a sort of digital signature. And that's considered legally binding in many situations, except when you're dealing with your bank, frustratingly. So I've very quickly built our own version of that called Kwanda Sign. And the second part of the skill takes that PDF, and rather than attaching it to an email, which is kind of useful, but the client would still need to download the PDF, sign it in Adobe, and then send it back to us, they now simply receive an email link with that PDF attached, not attached to it, embedded, that they can sign with their digital signature. And when they press submit, I just receive the signed PDF, and they never had to deal with any PDF documents or anything. They just see the signing process. So we really are in a quite magical moment in technology where you can do things like this. The last demo, and we're going to try and create some time for questions at the end, I believe. Is that cool? Invoicing, every business needs to do this. This has been a bee in my bonnet for some time. Like just my girlfriend and I ran a small agency before this, and we would send out our 10 to 15 invoices every month. And I just hated that process of like 2 hours of working out who we need to invoice, what are the line items, what are the costs, updating everything, and then sending them out. So I've been on a mission to solve this one for a long time. I'm going to initiate this from a different location, which is my WhatsApp. And this is the one that's most likely to fail, because I'm using here what's called an AI agent. This is a Kwanda product that we've been trialing for the last 2 weeks or so, which is a very intelligent, multi-tool connected AI model running behind the scenes that lives in your WhatsApp. Talk to us about it afterwards if you're interested in it. But we use it to commission all sorts of skills like this, and I often use it to create invoices. So let's see if it can do it. In the Kwanda organization of my Xero account, create an invoice populated completely with dummy data so that I can show the draft invoice to a group of people watching me do this. So the way the agent works is kind of similar. It's going to go and look through a set of skills that I've given to it through my usage of the agent, and it will read that description, the first line of the agent in each of the skill in each case. Which one of these matches what the user has asked me? Oh, this is why it's broken. It says this instance isn't connected to Xero, and it is, because I did this yesterday. You actually are connected. Just look at your skills and you'll see that there's a Xero invoicing skill there. So this is why the Kwanda agents are still on a 14-day free trial, because they don't always work as expected. But this workaround did work yesterday. In any case, it doesn't matter if this works or not. The fact is, we could commission this skill from, there we go, you're right, there is a second Xero skill here. Connection works, draft invoice created. So let's jump over to Xero and see if that worked. Just zoom in here. I'll refresh the page. Don't ask me for a code. And there we go, demo workflow customer in my drafts account. So this is an invoice for, let's just see, 8,870 Rand. And we can see, is that the one that created? Yes, 8,870 Rand. It just used dummy data to do that. But this is obviously my live, our live Xero accounting software for our business. So very cool that did end up working. And I really wanted to show you the agent carrying that out, because we saw Claude earlier connecting to my Gmail. We saw Claude code. I was able to prompt it, and it was able to find out what skill it needed to use to carry out. And now I've used my agent, which is actually using the same protocols, skills, and multi-step workflows, and connecting to tools and so on in order to carry out a request. So the point is that there are lots of ways to initiate these things and lots of ways to interface with your AIs, and you can really have them sort of surrounding you in your daily workflow and execute and initiate them from any position. So I think that is my demos. They all worked, which is an absolute miracle. And Chris, am I right that I'm handing back over to you? Good stuff.